What I don't believe in, and have never believed in, is lying or misleading people, because in the end I think you damage yourself and you damage politics at large.
So you don't think at the moment your party is doing that?
No, I don't, no.
Oliver Dowden, thank you for joining us here.
Delighted.
Look, AI is something that the government has been really focused on, but a lot of people, when they hear talk of AI, they get a bit worried about their jobs.
Yeah.
How can you guarantee that people won't lose their jobs? Can you?
Well, it's always been the case that when a new technology comes along, there is what politicians call dislocation, or economists call dislocation. That's you move from one job to another. So, for example, if you think when the horse and cart was replaced by the car, you had people that went from repairing horses and carts to repairing cars. You had people from driving horses and carts to driving cars. It will be the same with artificial intelligence. But I think the thing about artificial intelligence, and I think the opportunity, if we get it right, is it means we can help people do their jobs better. So if you think about it, it's like a kind of aid on your shoulder, which will hopefully enable you to do the more interesting part of your job. So if you take AI, it will deal with the kind of administrative, boring stuff, give you a level of knowledge, and you can build on that. And I think, for example, say in relation to healthcare, the kind of AI we're seeing, ambient AI that you'd wear, would, for example, allow a doctor, when he's discussing your condition with you, instead of that phenomenon, where the doctor sort of heads down, you're talking to him, talk to you naturally, and then the AI records the sort of diagnosis and writes the notes up for you, which means the doctor can focus on eliciting information and diagnosing, and the AI can do some of the grunt work. And I think that is the opportunity with AI that you haven't seen with other technologies.
Does it worry you that people will probably end up losing their jobs? Because I think you have said at one point that is something that you think could actually be beneficial in areas like the Cabinet Office, where there are a lot of people working in a particular sector. Does it worry you that could then transfer over to other sectors, and you could see actually quite a lot of people having to think about getting a new career?
Well, I think it's worth taking each of them in turn. What I would say is, generally, of course, I don't want anyone to go through the trauma of losing their job. And I've talked about this before. When I was a kid and my dad lost his job at a wire factory in Watford, near where I now represent, that was a defining experience for him and for my family. So I don't treat this lightly. But at the same time, I think if we are to create those jobs of the future, people will move into jobs of the future. And if you take, for example, the public sector, I think there is an opportunity that for the first time in my life in government, I can actually say, I think we can deliver more for less. We can actually get people focusing on what the public care about, the frontline delivery, and reduce expenditure on civil servants in the back office. I think it's also the case across the wider economy. If I think about the kind of jobs that I want my children to do, if you look, for example, film and creative industries, those are the sort of things that are less likely to be displaced by AI. So, of course, we'll have a movement. And in fact, you want to see that movement towards higher skilled jobs that pay more and create more wealth and opportunity.
I think another area where people have big questions about AI is in elections. We're in an election year. How are you preparing for what could come? I mean, it could be quite disruptive if AI is used in a negative way in an election. I mean, do you have a group of people looking at that? What's your sort of plan?
Yes, and I have very serious concerns about AI in the context of an election year. And this is a big election year. There's 4 billion people going to the polls. It's not just in the huge, United States and highly likely the United Kingdom, but Indonesia and elsewhere. And if you look at the kind of things that are a problem already, deep fakes and so on, if you then apply AI to it, you get to a more sophisticated level of opportunity for people to disrupt elections. Our response to that is we've created the Defending Democracy Task Force. We're coordinating that through my department and with the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat. And that's about drawing in all the relevant parties, whether that's the security services, the Electoral Commission and others, so that we can have an understanding of where those risks lie and we can work rapidly to rebut some of those challenges. What I would say, though, is I do think that this election will be different in that it may be the case that people will have to look at some of these images and ask themselves first, is it real? rather than necessarily assuming that it is the case. And that has been the case with other technological transformations, but I do think this will be a significant theme for this election, particularly in the US and the UK.
And that's going to require people who are voting to step up. So I suppose from your party's perspective, can you guarantee that the Conservatives won't touch on the fringes of that? Because we have seen at times parties use imagery, use video, use language to suggest something that isn't actually quite true.
Well, it's always been the case that political parties use advertising, and whether it's political adverts or billboards on increasingly online, but we won't be using artificial intelligence to spread misinformation or disinformation.
It's more whether or not you would cross a line, because I think some people feel that sometimes it does cross a line. Some of the things that are said about political opponents in the House of Commons, outside of it, but also in elections, it can walk quite close to getting towards a lie, really. And it's hard for voters sometimes to know whether they can trust it.
Well, I've always believed in robust political discourse, and in fact, I'm been part of that myself, not least doing Prime Minister's questions opposite Angela Rayner. But what I don't believe in, and have never believed in, is lying or misleading people, because in the end, I think you damage yourself and you damage politics at large.
So you don't think at the moment your party is doing that?
No, I don't, no.
Because, the other day, your Prime Minister suggested that Keir Starmer was a terrorist sympathiser. Would you say the same thing? Would you say that Keir Starmer was a terrorist sympathiser?
Well, I think what Rishi Sunak was highlighting, and I believe it was at Prime Minister's questions, was the fact that he had represented, and I believe it was Hizb ut-Tahrir, which the government has prescribed.
Yeah.
So I would say that is the use of robust language. I wouldn't say that was the Prime Minister misleading.
But he was asked directly, is Keir Starmer a terror sympathiser? And the Prime Minister answered, the facts speak for themselves.
Well, that's what the Prime Minister was pointing out. The Prime Minister was pointing out, and if you look at that...
What he's saying is he's saying yes.
If you look at that whole exchange, and I was there, I sat next to or one away from the Prime Minister's questions. The Prime Minister.
This isn't actually
but I think this was this point, forgive me, Kate, was this point about Hizb ut-Tahrir and the fact that Keir Starmer, when he was a lawyer, represented Hizb ut-Tahrir, I believe, at the European Court. And I think that was the point he was making, and the point the Prime Minister was making, was that is an organisation that has been proscribed.
Yeah. And I'm asking you a slightly different question, which is that we've just talked about the importance of language, we've talked about the importance of people being able to trust what politicians are saying. And the Prime Minister was asked, is Keir Starmer a terror sympathiser? And he said the facts speak for themselves. Now, a lot of people have taken that the Prime Minister is saying that he is a terror sympathiser. And I'm asking you, do you think that is acceptable?
I think it's acceptable what the Prime Minister said, which was that the facts speak for themselves. He was setting out those facts for people to understand them.
One of the really big, areas in the election that I think people have questions about is whether or not they can really trust any politicians. Now, we did some polling, Times Radio did some polling, and we gave people a series of different questions, whether Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak were statesmanlike, whether they could lead in a war, lots of things that you would expect. Now, in every single one of those 9 areas, voters chose neither. They chose not to back Sunak or Starmer. Neither came out on top. Why do you think that might be?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that we've been in power for 13 years. Right? Inevitably, there is going to be a sense of fatigue with a government that's been in power for 13 years. The fact that you're also finding that in respect of the leader of the Labour Party, when they haven't even entered power yet, of course, I've been working to make sure that doesn't happen, I think is pretty telling. And I think probably the reason for that, and this is an experience I've had up and down the country on the doorstep, is there's just no enthusiasm for Keir Starmer to be Prime Minister.
There's no enthusiasm for you either.
Of course there is an issue, and this is what we have to work across, and this reflects in the poll ratings we see right now. We have to address people's concerns about what has happened over the past 13 years. Now, I'm confident that Rishi Sunak has a clear plan. He's got a plan that is working. Of course, there's more to do, whether it's in respect to reducing inflation, getting the economy growing. But he has got that plan. He's getting on with it. But they're not listening
to you, are they? That's the point.
What I think is the case is there's a slight difference between, but not a slight difference, a very big difference between in the run-up to an election, we're still very much in the run-up to an election period, when people are asked in those polls, well, that's for the Prime Minister, of course. When people are asked in those polls, what do they think of the parties? Basically, they're asked, what do they think about the government? Of course, they're not going to be massively enthusiastic when we've been in power for this long, and all this the kind of things that have happened. And you've reported very well about whether it's in relation to what happened with the previous Prime Minister and the budget, or what happened with Partygate and so on. But when you get to an election, you switch from that, and you then get to a choice. And that is the choice people face at the election, between either Rishi Sunak leading the Conservative Party to lead our country, or Keir Starmer leading the Labour Party. And I think that's when you will see the difference between Rishi, is someone who I've known for many years, who's rolled up his sleeves and got on with the challenges facing this country.
So you think people will give you the credit at the ballot box?
Well, whether it's in relation to Northern Ireland, Windsor Framework, or the work's done in relation to inflation. And I think when we get to that point, people will actually look at what has this guy, Rishi Sunak, achieved, and what can he do for the country going forward. And again, I see in Rishi Sunak someone who's really committed to hard work and to aspiration. And I think in the end, and this is often the case in elections, that the DNA of the Conservative Party about hard work, aspiration, standing up for our country, in the end, that is where the British people's DNA is as well. And again, I think that will serve in our favour.
Do you think there's anything that you're doing wrong right now? Because if I had a performance review, I'd asked a lot of people, do you think I'm doing a good job? And a lot of people said, no, I think you're doing a terrible job. I might look and see if there was anything I was doing wrong. Do you think there's anything you're doing wrong?
Yes, of course, there's a lot more we need to do in many of these areas. So,
what's the biggest thing you're doing wrong right now?
The biggest things we need to see improvements are, first of all, in relation to the NHS, we've made good progress. For example, we've eliminated 2-year waiting lists. We've virtually done it for 18 months. We've put more resources in, but of course we need to go further to meet people's expectations. In relation to small boats, we've made good progress, down by a third, but people want this to stop altogether. But what I would say in both of those is we have got this plan to deal with it. And I would challenge, and this I think comes back to the election, when it comes out in the election, I genuinely, and I'm not saying this to make a political point, I genuinely don't know what Keir Starmer would do to stop the boats. And I think people can see that contrast between a plan and no plan. And when it gets to that contrast, I think that's what.
Or they might look at it and see a plan that's not working and somebody who's saying something different.
Well, actually, I don't think that is the case for the reasons I set out. Actually, interestingly, if you look at waiting lists, when we didn't have the doctors' strike in that month in November, we saw the waiting lists.
they're still exponentially high.
Fall. And likewise with small boats, we concluded the Albanian deal, down by 90% for Albania, and there's more to do.
Lee Anderson, former chairman of your party, co-chairman of your party, deputy chairman of your party rather, he said that sometimes he feels like the government treats British people like their children. You don't treat them like they're adults. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's the case at all, no.
Okay. Why do you think he might say that?
Well, I'm afraid I don't know the context of what Lee Anderson's comments, of course, and I'm merely speculating here. There are obviously live debates going on now about, for example, our smoking policy, but I don't believe that, I don't accept that characterisation.
He also said that you're out of touch with the way that real people in this country are living, how much they're struggling, that the party sometimes makes decisions in Westminster and it doesn't understand how people outside of here feel. I mean, he was a deputy chairman of your party until very recently. That's quite a tough thing to hear, isn't it?
Well, I think most of us, myself included, spend a huge amount of time out and about in our constituencies. I spend huge amounts of time at my local schools, my hospitals, meeting with people, understanding those concerns, and I use those public services myself. Now, of course, we're sitting in these very august surroundings of my ministerial office, and of course, ministers at their point of serving as a minister have a different experience. But what I would say is, through all of those interactions, how I live my day-to-day life outside of this ministerial life, I'm very much engaged with people's concerns. And that's why, for example, I know how people are worried about the cost of living. And that's why we've announced this additional £300 payment that's coming out today. That's why we're controlling inflation, why we cut people's taxes with 450 quid more in their pockets this year alone. So I think that actually you can see through the policies being pursued by this government, we are addressing those concerns.
But you see, when people hear the Prime Minister making a £1,000 bet on Rwanda flights taking off, they look at that and they think that's out of touch. A lot of people would never be able to make a £1,000 bet.
Look, you've seen that interview, maybe. I haven't actually seen myself, but I know the context of it, which is Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan, and I've been interviewed by Piers Morgan myself. He's a brash, larger-than-life character. What he was really doing was challenging the Prime Minister. Is your policy going to work or not? And the Prime Minister was clear. His policy is going to work, and that's why he accepted the challenge from
Was
Piers
he right
Morgan.
to accept it? Would you accept a bet like that?
It's no different to if you and I were in the pub and people are talking about, I bet you such and such your policy won't work. Rishi Sunak was going back and saying, I bet you my policy will work. It's no more or less than that.
I want to ask you finally, because you mentioned it before, and I just want to make sure that people are clear about it. We were talking about immigration. It's one of the things that consistently comes up for voters that they really care about. Is the Conservative Party looking at this issue of people converting to Christianity in order to stay in this country? Because I think there are 40 migrants on board the Bibi Stockholm right now who are in the process of converting. There are only around 400 people on that barge. 40 is a lot. Does that worry you? Are you doing something about it?
Yes, I am very concerned about these reports, and I know that the Home Secretary is looking into the facts of exactly what's happening here. And it's constantly the case that in relation to immigration and asylum abuse, we need to crack down on where the loopholes happening. Now, I can't say for sure whether that is the case, but it's important that we get to the bottom of what's happened. And if abuse is happening, then we need to take steps to address it.
And if a guy like the attacker in Clapham, which is what's kind of sparked this conversation, in his case, he'd already been convicted of 2 sexual assaults. Why was he allowed to stay here and then granted asylum after that?
Well, I think it's a very good point, and that is exactly why we've been taking this legislation through Parliament right now.
But you couldn't have sent him to Rwanda, though.
Which means that if you come to this country illegally, you can't stay here. You'll either get sent back to your home country, or if it's not safe to do so, you go to Rwanda. And it's instructive to me that, again, that is where we've put forward a policy and a plan which has been opposed by the Labour Party, who don't have a plan to address this. And that's exactly those kind of contrasts that we'll see coming out in the course of an election.
I did say final question. I have one more question for you. Because you were a former co-chair of your party, you've got 2 by-elections coming up. Have you been out campaigning in Kingswood or Wellingborough?
I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to yet. I'm sure I will manage to do so before the day that the by-election happens.
It's a serious question, though, isn't it? Because you resigned because you lost 2 by-elections. These 2 look like they're probably not going to go your way. In fact, your party's actually lost 4 already since you resigned. You resigned saying someone had to be held accountable, you can't carry on as normal. But the party sort of has carried on as normal again. Does someone need to be held accountable?
But Kate, I think you're jumping ahead of yourselves.
Well, you've lost 4.
Writing off these by-elections before they happen, I have every confidence that both of those candidates will work hard and be able to win those elections. So I'm afraid I can't accept the premise in the first place.
But 4 have gone since you left. So you left after 2 by-election losses. You've had 4 more by-election losses since that point.
Yeah, well, I think you're looking forward to these 2. So let's part those 2 that have happened. I've not in any way, and I hope you've seen through the course of this interview, I've been honest with you about some of the challenges that the party has faced. But what I am confident about is that in Rishi Sunak, we have got a leader who's got a plan that can work for the British people, and that will work at the time of election. So I have confidence in the leadership of Rishi Sunak.
So you can carry on as normal?
I have confidence in Rishi Sunak and in the government and the path that we are pursuing.
Oliver Dowden, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.